What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video I'm going to be going through my Cornerstone Dynasty Fantasy Football rankings, not looking at any specific position, quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, all included, my overall Cornerstone ranks. This is going to be for Superflex, and I know people do Cornerstone rankings differently. Some people do it by age, others do it by draft class. For me, I'm going to do it by draft class, so I'm going to have the 2022, 2023, and 2024 draft classes included in this video. I just think it helps kind of compare these incoming rookies to the players that we've seen break into the NFL over the last couple of seasons. I'm also going to be splitting these players up into tiers, and the tiers are going to be based around where I think they should go in startup drafts, so it's pretty much going to be like the round where I think they should be drafted. I want to know your thoughts down below. Who do you have higher? Who do you have lower? There's just going to be a lot of variance on how we're viewing these younger guys. So let me know down below, but let's dive right into it. And we're going to start off in my top tier. That tier is going to be locked in round one startup pick. And I have one guy in this tier. It's going to be CJ Stroud. He had arguably the best rookie quarterback season of all time. He was the QB 8 in points per game, so it also translated to a strong fantasy season. And I think in terms of dynasty startup drafts, you could make an argument for CJ Stroud to be as high as probably third overall. I think Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, whatever order you have those two, they have to be the top two options. They've gotten it done year after year. They've also showcased a really high ceiling, which is something CJ Stroud just hasn't showcased yet. And so you could put CJ Stroud right after those two. I think there's also arguments for Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson. I don't know if CJ Stroud, without like super high rushing upside, is going to have the ceiling of those players, but he's also much younger, and you could probably make the argument that he's going to be the more durable guy, just has less injury risk long term. Also has a solid core around him with Tank Dell as a rookie, Nico Collins still pretty young, Dalton Schultz. So he's got, some weapons around him to work with. I think he's the one dude who's just like locked in round one startup pick in, every single dynasty league you're going to see. Now, shifting into the second tier, these are going to be players who I think can be picked at the round 1-2 turn. So maybe they're late round 1 or early round 2, but they're probably going to be going somewhere in that range. We're going to have Caleb Williams, Anthony Richardson, Puka Nacua, Bijan Robinson, and Breece Hall. So for Caleb Williams here, some people may not like this because we haven't seen him play in an actual NFL game, but in terms of quarterback prospects, he is a top tier one. He's going to be landing in a great spot here with the Bears. I know the Bears have like this history of, not, developing their quarterbacks. You had Trubisky, Fields, but I don't think that's like a fair thing. I think it's like the Ohio State quarterback thing where it's like, oh, Ohio State quarterbacks never pan out. Every situation is different. The Bears have a very strong core around Caleb Williams. This is a team that, was really streaking towards the end of the season. It's not like they had the worst record in the NFL. They got that pick from the Panthers. You have DJ Moore, you have Keenan Allen, you have Cole Kmet, they signed DeAndre Swift. So there are going to be some weapons here for Caleb Williams to work with, and he also has some rushing upside to give him a pretty high fantasy ceiling. So I do like Caleb Williams to lead this tier. If you're someone who wants to go with like a more established option from a different position, I get it. But for me, I do think Caleb Williams is like a back-end round one startup pick. After Caleb Williams, like I said, another quarterback, it's going to be Anthony Richardson. And we had a pretty small sample size of him from his rookie season. But in terms of his real-life NFL play, he looked very impressive, and he also just had great fantasy production. He has one of the higher rushing ceilings in the NFL. He's arguably the best quarterback athlete of all time. I mean, the dude just demolished the combine last season. So I think Anthony Richardson does belong here. He's going to be the Colts quarterback of the future, and I do like him here at the 1-2 turn. Then shifting away from the quarterback position, I have Puka Nacua here. I think I'm probably going to be higher on Puka than consensus, and I think the thing maybe holding people back is that he wasn't like some sort of elite prospect, which, is true. He was a day 3 pick. No one thought he would have this kind of ceiling, but with what we actually saw on the field, I don't see how he's not ranked this high. He had one of the best rookie wide receiver seasons ever, and fantasy-wise, he was a beast, and he did it without hitting in the touchdown department. 6 touchdowns in 17 games is nothing crazy. It's realistic to expect that he could see kind of serious improvement heading into 2024. Only 22 years old. He's attached to Matthew Stafford, attached to Sean McVay. I also think, putting him ahead of guys like Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, it really just comes down to wide receivers being safer assets. They have a longer shelf life, less risk of injury, so kind of just the safer play having Puka over those two. But then we have Bijan Robinson, a top-tier running back prospect, recently turned 22, so still very young. Probably got some of the biggest upgrades around him just offensively with Kirk Cousins coming in. and then Arthur Smith leaving. He has the 3-down skill set. I think Bijan Robinson is going to be a high-end running back 1 for the foreseeable future. And then Breece Hall, still only 22 years old, even though he's heading into his third season. He was the running back 6 in points per game, coming off a torn ACL. That's crazy. And not only just coming off the torn ACL, but being a part of a terrible offense with a bad offensive line and just horrible quarterback play. With Aaron Rodgers coming back, I really think Breece Hall has a crazy high ceiling for the 2024 season. And that's going to wrap up the 1-2 turn area. Now we're going to be looking at round 2 guys. Probably, more so mid to back end round 2 options. We're going to go Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Garrett Wilson, and Jahmyr Gibbs. So we're starting it off with the 2 top wide receivers in this draft class, Marvin Harrison Jr. and Malik Neighbors. I really don't think there's much separation between these two. It's so close, in fact, that if one goes to like a top landing spot and one has a rough one, I'd probably just put the top landing spot guy as my wide receiver 1. I don't think there's a ton of disconnect from those two. They're probably going to be drafted somewhere in like the pick 4, 5, 6 area. So I like both those dudes as our round 2 starter picks. I think both are going to smash once they get into the NFL. Then also in this rookie class, Drake May and Jaden Daniels. Both are likely going to be picked top 4 in this draft. They both have rushing upside. Jaden Daniels definitely has the higher rushing upside. He could be up there with like the Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson in terms of his rushing ceiling, Anthony Richardson. But May also has some of that. And I think in terms of startup picks, they're going to be like back end round 2 options. It's kind of like where Bryce Young settled in. I think they actually might have been more towards like high-end round 2 picks. CJ Stroud is probably like a round 3 startup pick. So that's kind of just like the price you're going to have to pay to get these rookie quarterbacks. There's obviously some risk because there's no guarantee they hit. But if they do hit and the ceilings that these guys do have, you're going to have them on your roster, pretty much forever, giving you really strong QB1 production. Then after those quarterbacks, we're going with Garrett Wilson. I'm expecting wide receiver 1 fantasy production out of Garrett Wilson this season. He had a strong year 1 and year 2, despite playing in a terrible offense. I guess the one kind of red flag here for Garrett Wilson would just be there's no long-term quarterback solution. So even if Rodgers plays really well for the next year or 2, maybe 3 if he's lucky. Obviously, we can't look too far ahead, but he doesn't have like that young quarterback that he's going to be growing with throughout the rest of his career, but still a dude I have in like my top 24 overall. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Jahmyr Gibbs, running back 8 in points per game as a rookie. I think he's going to be a locked-in running back 1 year after year. I think the only thing that holds him back here and why I have guys like Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall ahead of him is just the usage. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy who's used as like a 3-down back, which, it's going to cap his elite upside, but he can still be a great fantasy asset. Splitting touches with David Montgomery in this Lions offense, that's going to be impressive. So still very high in Jahmyr Gibbs, but just not quite in that same tier with the Breece Halls and the Bijan Robinsons. Now pivoting into the next tier, we're going with the round 3 players. I have Brock Purdy, J.J. McCarthy, Devon Achane, Drake London, Tank Dell, and Chris Olave. For Brock Purdy, as long as he's the 49ers starting quarterback, he'll deliver solid top 12 fantasy production. The only kind of concern / red flag here would be, are we like positive he's the 49ers long-term answer? If he does end up getting like a big second contract, this probably will be too low to have him ranked here. I don't know if he like has that elite fantasy upside just based on the lack of rushing upside. Plus, they're always going to have a strong run game with McCaffrey, Debo mixing in. So I think this is a fair spot for Brock Purdy. As long as he's the starter, he's going to be a pretty solid QB1. Then we have J.J. McCarthy, probably the dude who's getting the most hate in this draft class. I guess maybe Caleb Williams too, but it seems like a lot of people do not think J.J. McCarthy should be like a top 4 pick, which is where it seems like he's trending at this point. And honestly, if J.J. McCarthy goes like pick 4 to the Vikings, he's getting bumped up into that round 2 tier just based on that landing spot. And I think it's clear the NFL is very high on him, higher than the fans. So I think this is like a fair spot to have him currently. And if he is just like locked into a top 4 pick, he'll probably just have to jump into that like Jaden Daniels, Drake May area. I guess the one difference is that he doesn't really have that crazy rushing upside. It's not that he's like a bad athlete. He's not a statue, but just in general, his tendency is not to run, which is kind of the biggest thing transitioning into the NFL. You can test really well athletically, but if you're not a dude who actually scrambled and rushed in college, it's not going to be like great odds for you to then do it at the NFL level. Like a dude like Justin Herbert, he tested really well athletically, but he's just not a dude who's, prone to taking off and running like we've seen in college and then in the NFL. So after those quarterbacks, we're going with Devon Achane. Probably one of the craziest rookie seasons just based on some of the huge ceiling games he had. The fact that he was like their RB4 heading into the season, finished as the running back 5 in points per game. I just like Achane. I know there's some durability concerns. He's kind of like in that Jahmyr Gibbs area where he's never going to have a Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson usage ceiling. But being paired with Mike McDaniel, I just think this is a great spot for Achane to give you some really strong numbers, even if he's not putting together a huge workload. Then we're going to go with Drake London. I'm very high on Drake London. I know the first 2 seasons fantasy-wise haven't been great, but he's still only 22 years old. I'm expecting a huge breakout here with Kirk Cousins at quarterback. 2 more wide receivers. We have Tank Dell. Now, he is an older rookie, 24 years old, so that is something to note, but I'm actually surprised at how low people seem to be on Tank Dell. Not that they think he's like terrible or anything, but when you look at the games where him and Nico Collins were both healthy, they were neck and neck in terms of their production. He averaged over 17 PPR points per game. He is a locked-in top quarterback with CJ Stroud moving forward. I think Tank Dell is a very strong round 3 startup pick. And then the final wide receiver, Chris Olave. I think talent-wise, you could definitely make the argument that Chris Olave should be higher. He's had a strong first 2 seasons without great quarterback play, but the truth is he's going to be capped with his upside until he gets a locked-in, established, strong quarterback option, right? Like a dude like Drake London, Olave outproduced him through 2 years, but now Drake London has Kirk Cousins, Tank Dell has CJ Stroud. Chris Olave doesn't have that long-term quarterback to really unlock his fantasy ceiling, so not his fault as a player, just the current situation he's in with the Saints. Now pivoting into round 4, we're going to have some tight ends in this tier. Brock Bowers, Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, Rome Odunze, Kyron Williams, and Rashee Rice. So starting off with these tight ends, for so long it had seemed like the tight end position was so gross. It was like if you're not getting one of those elite options like a Travis Kelce or Rob Gronkowski, Mark Andrews, if you weren't getting one of those dudes, it was just a rough position to be in. With the tight ends, you might as well just wait, throw a dart on some dude who's going to get like 9, 10 PPR points a game, hoping he gets into the end zone. That is not the way the tight end position is trending at this point. It's looking very strong with some of these young guys. I have Brock Bowers ahead of Sam Laporta, Trey McBride. I get it if you want those dudes ahead of him because they're more proven in terms of their production, but he is truly elite as a prospect, Brock Bowers. I mean, a tight end breaking out as like the top target for a top team in year 1 is pretty crazy. Put up strong production in all 3 seasons, so I like him at the top of this tier. Then we have Sam Laporta, who averaged 14.1 PPR points per game as a rookie. He's in a great situation with the Lions. Gotta like him also. And then Trey McBride. I do think there's an argument for Trey McBride to be ahead of Sam Laporta. I don't think a lot of people would agree with that, but I think the argument could be there. Once McBride took over as the starting tight end for the Cardinals, remember we had Zach Ertz there at the beginning, he averaged 15 PPR points per game. So McBride is a dude who has that very high ceiling at the tight end position, which is what you'd be drafting him for here in round 4. Then we have Rome Odunze, likely a top 10 pick in this year's draft, my number 7 prospect in this class in terms of my Superflex rankings. A lot of people have him really close with like Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors. I'm not there, but I still think he's a very strong prospect. Then Kyron Williams, and Kyron Williams is probably one of the tougher dudes to rank just because he's coming off a monster season where he averaged 21.2 PPR points per game, and if Kyron Williams was like a first-round pick in the NFL draft, he would be right up there with Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson. He'd be right in there with those dudes. But he was not a round 1 pick. He was a day 3 pick. Historically, those guys don't have a ton of security. Fortunately, at this point, the Rams haven't made really any moves to suggest that they don't want Kyron Williams to be their clear running back 1. Maybe he's not going to have the same monster workload he saw last year, but at this point, it doesn't seem like they want to replace him. I think that's the smart decision. You got a dude super cheap who produced at a high level. You would think you'd want to keep him. That's not, the way that NFL teams always view the situation, but the Rams, they're a smart organization. Hopefully they keep riding Kyron Williams here. And then the final guy in this tier is going to be Rashee Rice. Finished as the wide receiver 28 in points per game as a rookie and really just went on a tear over his last 6 games, 18.5 PPR points per game. I think the one kind of question mark here is that his ADOT was very low. It was like 5 yards per target, which is not great. That's more like a gadget player. So He produced really well, especially later on in the season, but once we get some real competition in here, right, you have Hollywood Brown coming in, maybe they draft a wide receiver in the first round. Is he going to be able to sustain his production with other top wide receivers there? The wide receiver room was terrible for the Chiefs last year, so that's the question mark, but still very impressive, paired with Patrick Mahomes. Definitely some room for optimism with Rashee Rice. Now we're getting into the round 5-6 area. Guys kind of all mixed together here. We're going to go with Dalton Kincaid, Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, Will Levis, Brian Thomas Jr., Jackson Smith-Njigba, and then Bryce Young. So starting off with Dalton Kincaid here. Definitely didn't have like some sort of crazy breakout rookie season. May seem weird that he's ahead of guys like Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, who produced really well as rookies. But tight end 13 in points per game at the tight end position for a rookie is pretty impressive. I also think he's a guy who's set up for a year two breakout. He's attached to Josh Allen, which is just going to give him a ceiling that a lot of other tight ends won't have. So I'm still very in on Dalton Kincaid here. Then we have back-to-back rookie wide receivers. For Jordan Addison, he finished as the wide receiver 30 in points per game. Flowers was the wide receiver 31. For Addison, the only main question mark here is the quarterback position. I think the Vikings are a great landing spot for a rookie quarterback, whether it's McCarthy, May, Daniels, just based on having Justin Jefferson, having Jordan Addison, having TJ Hawkinson there. But that doesn't mean the quarterback's going to pan out, right? If they pick JJ McCarthy, it doesn't work out. You're in a tough spot with Jordan Addison where you have a lot of target competition. You're not going to be the wide receiver one over Justin Jefferson, and that creates some problems. Now, if McCarthy, May, whoever it is, if they pan out, then this is probably going to end up being too low, but we just have to factor in the upside and the downside of a rookie quarterback. And then for Zay Flowers, he should be the Ravens wide receiver one moving forward. I think fantasy-wise, he's probably more in that wide receiver two area. I don't know if he has like an elite upside at the position, but I think this is a fair spot for a dude like Zay Flowers. Then we have some quarterbacks here, starting off with Will Levis. Didn't have like a super impressive statistical season as a rookie, but he really showed some flashes, and he has all the tools to be a high ceiling fantasy quarterback. Dude, 6'4", 240 pounds. He's mobile, not going to run a ton, but he can, rack up some touchdowns just with his physicality and his style. I mean, the dude's reckless. So even though he's not racking up a ton of rushing yards, he's going to go out there. He's going to try to get into the end zone. And then the dude is a cannon. The other bright side here for Will Levis is that the Titans are choosing to build around him, right? He was a second-round pick. There was no guarantee he was going to get a legit shot, but he made a lot of starts for them last year. It seems like they're kind of loading up around him. They added Calvin Ridley, added Tony Pollard, upgraded the offensive line a little bit, and they also have the number 7 pick, which could be an O-lineman, could be a wide receiver. Maybe they go defense, but it's another opportunity for them to bring in someone to help Will Levis. And I just think with the potential ceiling he does have, I'm willing to take a little bit of a swing on him here in like the round 5-6 area. Then we have Brian Thomas Jr., likely going to be a mid-first round pick in this year's draft, and I think he's going to be a top 10 rookie pick in your rookie drafts. Then we have JSN, who statistically didn't have a great rookie season, but it's kind of understandable just based on his target competition, right? He was the wide receiver 3 behind DK Metcalf, behind Tyler Lockett. His usage was also kind of strange. He was being used like a gadget player, which is not his strength. He only had a 6.4 ADOT, which is very, very low. So I think if he gets used differently, we could definitely see a nice year 2 performance out of him. And then we're going to go with Bryce Young, and no doubt about it, had a rough rookie season. Some people are completely writing him off. I'm definitely not. It's understandable why he struggled. He really did not have a ton of help around him. I just think the problem here for Bryce Young is that in general, he was never going to have a super high ceiling. Even when he was being drafted last year for fantasy, just physically, he doesn't have a freak arm. He's not going to add much as a rusher. So his kind of upside was that he was going to be the safe quarterback. He was probably going to be a good NFL QB who could give you, maybe back-end QB1 production year after year. Maybe in like a boom year, he's more of a mid-tier QB1. And so the fact that he really struggled early on as a rookie, and then you mix in the fact that the ceiling isn't there, now it's like he's not a super high ceiling guy, and he also doesn't seem that safe after struggling as a rookie. So that's why I prefer Will Levis, even though he has way worse draft capital. I mean, number 1 pick to a second rounder. Typically, you're going to roll with that number 1 pick unless the second rounder went crazy, which Will Levis didn't necessarily do. But it just comes down to the ceiling, where if Bryce Young hits, like I said, his ceiling's probably like a back-end QB1, whereas if Levis hits, I just think he has some more upside there. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at those quarterbacks. And then the final tier here, round 7, Starting to get into some more running backs, James Cook, Rashad White, some rookie wide receivers, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, and then Kenneth Walker. Overall, I'm not super high on this tier of running back. I think they're probably going to get picked more around 5, round 6. With all these dudes, I just don't know if they have that workhorse upside. Seems like the Bills constantly want a committee with James Cook, and I don't know if he's ever going to be getting the goal line work there. For Rashad White, he was the workhorse last season, but in terms of his efficiency numbers across the board, they were pretty rough, which means it's not a great sign that he is going to retain that workhorse role. I'd be pretty surprised. I imagine they're going to draft someone and it's going to turn into somewhat of a committee. He could still lead the backfield, but I don't know if he's going to be like the clear-cut RB1 like we saw last year. And then just to skip over the rookies for a second, with Kenneth Walker, he already has built-in competition with Zach Charbonnet. They did last year what I'm afraid the Bucs are going to do this year with Rashad White, where they drafted Zach Charbonnet, I believe, in the second round, even after people thought Kenneth Walker had a solid rookie season. And I also just wouldn't be surprised if this was a closer committee in 2024 with Zach Charbonnet. I think he's going to get a lot of the receiving work. Who knows about the goal line? I just don't know if any of these dudes are going to be long-term, like clear-cut RB1s, which is just going to cap their upside. And the fact that the running back position, there's so much injury risk, I would rather just invest in like the wide receivers within this area. And then the 2 wide receivers, Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, my wide receiver 5 and wide receiver 6 in this class. Worthy's probably going to go round 1, if not early round 2. Troy Franklin, probably more of a day 2 guy, but I like both those dudes as prospects. So that's going to wrap it up for, I believe, my top 30 Cornerstone rankings. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Let me know your thoughts down below. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.